ever feel like you were going mad?
Oh, wow.
Okay, am I going mad?
That's a bit ominous, isn't it?
I feel like I'm going mad every day Sunday.
1000% I thought I was going mad. Because I had a bunch of motherfuckers around me that told me I was.
There's so many levels to this.
The anxiety that we felt.
Self-doubt.
Insecurity.
Depression.
Imposter syndrome.
Are you sure you're good enough?
Do I deserve to be here?
What makes me so special? I've had that question asked of myself by my reflection many times. Are you going mad? Because you're in a family where you fall in line. So to even have the thought that you could do things differently, are you going mad? You want to use the internet to do what? You must be mad. Me waking up every day and standing firm, daring to give my children a better life, even though they're as black as me, that has to surely be madness. But sanity weren't getting me nowhere.
The type of work we do as black people, it's like you feel the pressure of your ancestors around you, a physical touch. It's like you have something in you and it's like you need to birth it.
Or you can't eat, sleep, or do anything else. And that's why I was like, I'm like a vessel.
My relationship with creativity alongside my own mental health has been intrinsic. And for a long time, if I'm not creating, I'm not mentally healthy.
Creating was my meditation because that was all that mattered.
Yes, there were people that were telling me I'm crazy, but I had solid people around me that were like, no, you are not crazy. These people are. And you're in a business where you are a unicorn of sense. So you're going to feel crazy a lot because the nature of the space that you're in is so opposite of how you move as an individual.
I'm Jordan Stevens, and I am a writer and performer. My relationship with creativity has been a difficult one because for so much of my life I was creating from a place of anxiety or deeper than that pain, a desire to escape. And with my grandmother, my Caribbean grand called Veronica, the reason I am a poet, rapper, a lot of my fondest memories are with her. Until the day she died, even when her brain was withering away and she was in a lot of pain, she could just recite entire poems and songs, man. She used to know that Rudyard Kipling's poem, If, back to front, and she would make me sit with her and recite it. There's this kind of bizarre paradox, especially in the times we live in now, this whole idea of monarchy and the empire. There's a complex situation. Rudyard Kipling, he wrote A White Man's Burden, you know, that it was a reflection of a empirical time, horrendous time in history. But that poem has some beauty in it. I just remember being in a hospital with her and she could barely even see by this point, you know, and all I'd have to say is, if you can keep your head. And all about you are losing theirs. And she just beam. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for the doubting too.
My name is Ncuti Mizero Gatwa, and I am an actor. My parents grew up in the countryside in Rwanda. They worked their asses off and both went to university. By the time I was born, I think we were living a pretty middle-class life. We had 2 Jeeps. We had a pool. My dad was very well respected. And then the genocide happened and everything got wiped out. And then we came to the UK.
So the reason why we moved to the US was my family went through a robbery and a kidnapping, and women in my family were assaulted. We were on this road. I remember seeing these tires that had been cut open and nails had been hammered in upright, creating a trap. And our little van ran over that. 2 robbers come in with their AKs. They told us to put our heads down in the seat. And instead of firing up for whatever reason, he fired down. And when he fired down, he caught my right foot. We ended up fleeing. They were shooting at us as we were leaving. When I got off the bus, that's when we knew my foot had been injured because I couldn't walk. So My mom put me on her back. My uncle eventually carried me through, and we ran for it. After that, my mom was like, you know what? Let's try the U.S. for a little while. Nigeria's not the only place with that. We just got an unlucky card for that moment. I can't stand when the African stories are flipped into these like cannibalistic, machete-wielding, gun-toting people as if the rest of the world don't do the same shit. There's more mass shootings here than there are in Nigeria. I feel safer there in a lot of spaces than I do here.
My dad is Jamaican.
St. Lucian.
From Mexico.
He grew up in a small village in Guinea.
Half Jamaican.
From Kenya.
Zimbabwe. Ghana.
My mum is English.
From Grenada.
Half Bayesian.
From the West Indies.
Somalia.
Russia.
My mum was born in the Congo, but she's British, from Leicester. And her parents worked as missionaries.
My parents are from Uganda. I grew up in northwest London, a small council estate called St. Raphael's. My parents both had privileged upbringings in Uganda, conservative, middle class. Uganda has a long cultural history, can trace its monarchs back about 40 generations. That's what they clung to for a sense of identity. Political turmoil in Uganda really pushed my parents to look for opportunities elsewhere. And they arrived in this country with that sense of identity, but what they weren't prepared for was the ghettoization of the working class black community in northwest London. No one briefed them about that.
One of the most traumatic aspects of my childhood was this kind of cultural dichotomy where I go home into my house and I'm with my mum, who's working 3 jobs, by the way, because she doesn't believe in taking benefits, who's cooking Nigerian food and treating us as if we're African children, then going into the world and seeing people who are completely out of their heads on heroin. At that time, I think there was only about 2 Afro-Caribbean families, like literally in the whole country.
I realised very quickly, growing up in Scotland, I was not quite like the other boys and girls in my class.
Bless my parents. They received a culture shock through their children. We were coming home with language that they didn't understand, with attitudes and politics that they didn't understand from as early as, I would say, 3, 4 years old.
My father told me when I was young to not hang around with black Americans. But what he was talking about was the education piece. He was like, you're not gonna win in school if you stay with them. And I hated him at the time for it. I was like, what are you talking about, man? These are my friends, these are my people, and I owe it to those people that I grew up with in my neighborhood because they taught me how to be more outspoken, having that passion to speak truth against power.
My parents are very American, but also very Somali. I grew up with Somali furniture, Somali art. My mom cooked Somali food.
I used to always be like to my mom, it just doesn't make sense that you're raising me like we're living in Lagos, but we're living in London.
Knowing what I know now about my mom, there's so much about us that's similar, but she was in some ways still caught up in tradition. She was battling, I have a daughter, she needs to do traditional women gender role things.
And I would always find ways to kind of bend the rules, eventually get caught, and there was severe punishment for that.
As a kid, obviously, I didn't have any patience, so every time she's making a decision that I felt was wrong, it just made me not like her. I didn't think, okay, but give her some space, like, let's see why it's happening that way.
Any immigrant to anywhere understands that you're scared. You're in a culture, in a country that you don't know. You want your kids to do as well as possible and keep them as safe as possible, and you can only do that with what you know.
I just remember seeing the video and being like, what did he do to deserve being beaten like that? And I remember what happened when those officers were acquitted. And I remember for days, like, watching the news and seeing burning buildings and understanding, wow, people are really angry, and also not understanding how it gets resolved.
Even though I was really young when Stephen was murdered, the conversation has been an underscore to my life.
Stephen Lawrence's death galvanized so much in my household. Prior to his death, what my mother was talking about was don't be a street urchin. So when my friends were hanging out after school, no, straight home, because this might happen or this might happen. And you're thinking, who's it going to happen to? I remember when news hit of Stephen Lawrence's death, sitting down at our dinner table and my mother breaking down to us. She cried, we all cried, starting to understand that these heinous, unjust things could happen just because you're Black.
Stephen Lawrence's experience affected me subconsciously my entire life, but consciously during my GCSEs, when I discovered Chris Ofili's work, No Woman, No Cry. And it was kind of like a missing puzzle piece to my mother's psyche, because I remember growing up, she wouldn't let us play with certain types of people. My mum, she's not going to tell a 5-year-old, oh, someone like you got killed. She was just trying to protect her children. And it kind of made her neurotic.
Even now, if I have young boys, I will still have that fear. Are they going to come home?
Like, only imagine as a parent, the worry of like, well, what if this happens to my child? There's this place in Calabasas, and every Friday we would go and hang out with our friends. And it was like, you know, me wanting to like go hang out with the girls and do my thing. But every time I went, I had to have my security with me. I'm just like, Looking back, you know, it's appreciated. My parents are so strict when it comes to certain things like this. I have a younger brother that's about to be 16 and then 2 younger sisters who are growing up in the midst of this.
I do think there's a level of trauma in young Black children. Having the talk with young Black kids, young Black men, young Black women about getting pulled over by the police, keeping your hands in front of you.
It hurt that I had to be in this position of like not making any subtle movements, you know, addressing everything that I, you know, am doing before I do it. Okay, I'm gonna reach in my back pocket to grab my wallet, you know.
I realize we live in 2 different worlds in America. White people, they don't have to worry about how they dress or what they portray or walking down the street. Every time I see a police car, I get nervous.
I have seen Black men who look just like my brother, look just like my father. On Twitter, on Instagram, on Snapchat, being murdered by the cops since I was a child. It's something that is so common. We have a really big issue with anti-Blackness within our police departments, and a lot of the time, children see these things and they experience these things. Philando Castile, his daughter was in the car with him when he was murdered by the cops in 2017, a year after Jamar Clark was murdered. And so it's time and time again in my country that a Black man is murdered.
The traumas of every event, every subliminal message, every act of aggressive racism is gonna create a trauma, a bullet, a cut, anything on your body that you're gonna carry and carry and carry, and they will continue to build up, and then that creates what we see in society today.
At a point in time, something was placed on my people and my ancestors that told me that I was not worthy enough. So therefore, I have to debunk everything that was placed on me. And that is a part of the traumatic experience that I think that children, especially before me, have experienced, and we are slowly peeling that off.
Sometimes I struggle with understanding how I even value or see myself because I don't know where I'm from. I like fish and chips, like I'm proper British, but it's not like the beat of my heart. There's an oozing gap there sometimes. And I don't think I'm the only one in my generation that feels that. I think there's a lot of us.
Growing up in Canada with a Guinean father and a Russian mother, I, for a very long time, felt very confused as to what my identity was.
It's definitely a unique experience. Black and Mexican, nah, you're not Black. Your name's Miguel. You're just Mexican. No, you're Filipino. Like, whatever they want you to be.
too black to be Scottish, too Scottish to be black, too working class to be middle class. Like I don't know where I don't know where I fit in.
I've always found it really difficult filling in those forms where it says Black African, you know, Black Caribbean, Black other. And I'm like, so you're asking me to choose my mother or father, basically.
I sometimes feel like I'm a diplomat. I'm communicating between the Nigerian and the British, and then the British back to the Nigerian, but I don't solidly belong to either of those countries. I'm just this weird passing being that just knows how to be the middleman. It feels like I'm spending my whole life trying to reconcile which side is my side, because I can't just go to Nigeria, drop my briefcase and be like, home sweet home. There's this novelty that you are to your relatives where it's like, oh my gosh, this like shiny British thing. But then unfortunately there's this line where you can't really relate to them. And then you go back to Britain and it's like, go back to your country.
I've been told numerous times to go back to my country, go back to my roots. And I don't even know what the roots are. I've never been to Somalia. I've never really, stepped foot in the continent of Africa. America's all I know.
There's a distinction between being African, living in America, versus being an African American. To America, we're all black. But when we sit together and share stories, they're not the same stories. And then it's interesting, people with Caribbean or South American heritage then are kind of in between. They share some with African Americans, a history of slavery, and they have colonialism like Africans.
And I have friends who have Caribbean parents and feel themselves to be specifically Caribbean, And I have friends who have Caribbean parents but that were born in America and feel themselves to be specifically American. But I genuinely and authentically consider myself both Grenadian and Black American.
A lot of people always think about, the biracial child, that's what they feel. The parents feel that too.
I definitely had positive sort of ideologies around Black people growing up, even though it was from my white family, which, thinking about it, definitely helped, because I can guess that some mixed race people growing up in those circumstances wouldn't have necessarily had the same ideologies handed down to them.
I think every kid has some kind of challenge with identity in some way, shape, or form. When you're mixed and you get to a point where you wear it with pride, I think that's when you become limitless,
So we've surrounded you with your dad's records.
Okay.
If you look left and right of yourself.
Oh, wow! Okay. Oh, that's amazing. Oh, that's so lovely. My dad passed away when I was 16 years old. Growing up, I hadn't really got to know that side of my family at all, mainly because of the geography that they were in America and we were in England. When I was 21, I went to see my grandma and she took me out to the garage. She'd kept every single thing that he owned, and she gave me a little iced tea on a tray with some biscuits, and then she just left me to it for hours and hours and hours. I remember finding these records. Some of them I'd discovered for myself growing up. There was a song called Money in My Pocket that my dad always used to sing, and it still sort of resounds in my head now. When I hear those words, I hear his voice singing it. And when I found those and I sort of placed my hands on them, I sort of felt this connection with him, which was really important for me. And I wrote a song called Father's Son. So it goes like this. Maybe I care, maybe you don't. Maybe I'll let go, maybe you won't. Could there be two of us? Could there be two? Maybe I'm lonely, maybe you're lost. Maybe I'm an echo, I may be your ghost. Could there be two of us? Could there be two? Yeah.
I love being of Nigerian descent. However, it's very complicated because I am gay. I think there's definitely people who see being queer as a white concept especially people who are raised super religious. I grew up being homophobic myself because that's what my environment taught me to do. And I got out of it because that was my truth. I'm aware that me being in feminine clothing or singing about being with a man or just professing who I am can be something that alienates me from the Black community sometimes. I think it's everyone's responsibility who is in the position to highlight being LGBT and Black, you know? I just don't think that's talked about a lot because it's taboo.
I've always told myself I have literally 3 taboos. I am a Black man, I have albinism, and I'm also gay.
When I got married to my partner, my grandma, who loved me, didn't come to my wedding. I don't understand the stuff you do. Some of that was about being queer. Some of that was about not being from the Midwest. You know, being in California, she thought everything we did was crazy. But then she regretted it when she was dying.
Sexuality isn't a choice. Like, you don't wake up one day and go, you know what, I'm gonna have half the world hate me today, so I'm gonna choose to do this. Really think about it. Ask yourself, is this something that you would do? And so I would really put that to them when they would ask me, like, when did you come out? And I was like, oh, well, this morning at 9 a.m. when I was going to catch a train. And they'd be like, what? And I was like, oh, yeah, when did you become straight? And they're like, what? And so you literally have to give it to them in the same nuance of what they're asking to give them perspective and context onto the why. Like, why is this any of your business and why is it a concern?
You have to try twice as hard. That was my dad's #1 rule.
It was like in the air as a child.
I used to get told I had to try twice as hard because I'm Black. Like, simple.
I shouldn't have to work twice as hard as everyone else. That fundamentally isn't fair, and it's not glamorous to be exhausted all the time.
My mom, she had a lot of these little sayings. She would say things to me like, you gotta work twice as hard to be seen as half as good. She was giving me context for how to be excellent.
I had to be perfect. I had to be the top of the class. It was drilled in me. My father wanted to read a report card of every child to see where Gupta and Wong were, and Klein and Goldstein. That's how it was for me. So I made sure that I was at the top of every class, and I was.
If you interviewed my mom, she would tell you that her expectations for me were, I just wanted mans to be happy. That's a bold-faced lie. No immigrant parent just wants their kid to be happy. I mean, that's part of the equation, but they want you to be solid and successful.
The expectation of you is to become a lawyer, engineer, a doctor.
My parents, ideally, would have loved their children to be academics.
It's not just an expectation, it's prophecy. It's that serious.
Pretends to be shocked to West African parents.
When I told my father that I was gonna be a musician, he was not having it. Like, that was a sin.
Our parents didn't realize that part of having us here was to allow us to have the freedom to choose what road we're going to walk on.
The stuff that I wanted to do seemed like you couldn't monetize it if there wasn't a word for it, if there wasn't a transferable thing. It just seemed like it wasn't as important.
Like, I'm still my parents' biggest pride and disappointment at the same time. Because of the tattoos.
There was never any conversation about me not being a lawyer. Once my mum came into my room, and I wake up and my mum is throwing shoes at me. And she's saying, listen, like, you graduated almost a year ago. What are you doing? She'd found, like parents find these random, non-associated kind of like opportunities. And I remember her say, you have to go. And I remember getting up and getting dressed in a suit, shirt, a tie, everything. And I left the house. I was just banging my head against the wall thinking, why am I doing this? Is there something wrong with me? Like, particularly YouTube at the start, like, no one was doing YouTube. Then I was doing poetry on top of that. You come on stage and they'd get your name wrong, or they'd say, there's a poet coming up on stage, and everyone go, oh, like, you know what I mean? There was a lot of times where you question yourself and you think, what is the point?
A Black mother's womb is a blank canvas that births art into this world. Baby masterpieces given names that declare their potential. not to label what type of painting they will become. From a young age, we are told which colors we should use. Like, let's distinguish between the whites and the blacks, the brown eyes and the blues. Being black is the art of taking the road less traveled. It's standing on crossroads, no longer waiting for someone to press the buttons on your console. How do you take hold of the remote control? You often ask yourself, am I being played, or is it a game?